Nistu Nidanaku Maksaku Mapi, Brad Hall, President Blackfoot Community College. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this event today. A momentous event of knowledge, of culture, of relations. And I would just like to really thank all of you from coming near and far. I'd also like to thank our partners in research, any of our allies, people that have helped us to further our research capacity at Blackfoot Community College. Thank you for attending and coming. The important thing that I found as a researcher myself is that it is the basis of the foundation of research is your relationships. And if it wasn't for individuals who came before myself, the late Betty Bastine, many people in our Confederacy have furthered our ability to do the research that we need to do in order to further our knowledge and understand ourselves better. And I'm really honored to invite our first speaker up, a former Blackfoot Community College president, a longtime professor in the New Mexico University system, and one of our own, Dr. Don Pepion.
Okay. Isto apskapi pikani. Britannico itsimaki. My American name is Donald Pepion, and I'm really pleased, honored, and very humbled to be here to share some things with you. And actually the things I'm going to share come from you, so you'll hear some things that are familiar, but hopefully this talk will remind us about staying grounded, and that's really what it's all about. How do we stay grounded as a Piikani Blackfoot Nation's researcher, huh? And so sometimes that can be a challenge. We'll talk about that a little bit, and I do have a slide presentation. I will speak to that, and I have my notes because when I talk openly, it's on the Napiquan's time. It doesn't work, so I need to make sure I read this and do it on that time. So that's one of the right away we have a problem there because we know our Piikani time is different, huh? So we'll do that. Certainly want to acknowledge Brad, president of the college, demanding job. I was there when he gave his presentation one time over in Salish Kootenai, so we're familiar with that. Want to thank Natalie. She's here somewhere, I'm sure. She's done a lot of work for us, the folks in the NARCH grant, Betty Henderson, and certainly a lot of others here that are working on that grant. And I'm actually really amazed at Blackfoot Community College with this large health grant, because they're not only learning about doing research, but they're already publishing. And as people, those of us who are professors know that as a native, trying to get your research published is always a challenge, because what we call the Western knowledge system, or Euro-Western, you'll hear me talking about that, doesn't like native things, and especially if you're a native doing research, say with your own people, it's questioned. And we will see some things about that. So that's some of the acknowledgments I wanted to do. But I have this first slide, and we're beginning to remind us that stories are our theory. And when Bray Boy said this as a scholar, we finally had a scholar that had to work his way up to the point of where it was accepted in the Euro-Western or colleges. So this is Napi telling stories with the animals. I also want to acknowledge certainly the drummers and the singers. Paul, I've learned a lot from him over the years on songs, and our color guard that's so important, that has protected us, not only as Piikani people, but all people. And there's so many in here that I could acknowledge, but I really don't like to name names, but I need to do this. And I don't mean to embarrass you, Morse Lowolf, sitting over there. One of my teachers, and learned a lot from him. And again, a lot of our other elders in the Piikani. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay, I've done this affirmation, so let's go to this next one. And I'm going to read this to move through this rather quickly, but these notes will be available and that. So just reminding us that doing this research is a journey. That's what research is about. It's a journey. It's just like Napi. Napi, when he went to the sun and brought back the male part of our sun dance. But the important thing that is there is help our people. I say that's significant because that's the essence of our Piikani philosophy, our beliefs. So let's move to the next slide. What I want to talk to you about now, and again, most of you will know about this, some especially with your academics, so there's some academic language in here. But as I mentioned, how does a Native researcher stay culturally grounded in the Napiquan world, huh? And what is Indigenous research methodology anyway? And why Indigenous research methodology? What happened to us? Is there a difference between Native American and Western knowledge? And we're going to talk a little bit about community participatory action research. And that's something that is really my forte. And are there some Nitsitapi cultural strengths and resiliency that can help us? Again, what helps us stay grounded as a native person? So the next slide is about why Indigenous research methodology and what happened to us. Indigenous research methodology is really about, it's about colonization, subjugation, exploitation of indigenous social, political, economic systems, including lands, resources, lives, self-determination. And Linda Tuhewa Smith, the Maori, who really helped us in our indigenous study to really put words into a book that helps us. And she looks at it this way: the thousands of ways in which indigenous languages, knowledges, and cultures have been silenced, are misrepresented, ridiculed, and condemned in academic and popular discourses. It's also about oppression. If we want to, I guess we need to go to the next slide. I'm sorry. I need to keep up here. You're way, I'm ahead of you. So oppression is dehumanization by injustice, exploitation, oppression, violence. The oppressed may become the oppressor with adhesion to the oppressor. And this is an important sentence. Oppressors may use science and technology as powerful instruments to manipulate and suppress. And Paulo Freire, and I'm a Freirean, John Murray, who brought that to our community college way back in the 80s, many of us, it really opened our eyes to what's going on about especially how the oppressed can also become the oppressor. Freire says any situation which A, objectively exploits B or hinders his pursuit of self-affirmation as a responsible person is one of oppression. So let's move to the next slide. I thought I might have a podium, but that's all right. So the need to decolonize. What is that about? Decolonization is resistance to the forces of colonialism that perpetuates subjugation and exploitation of our minds, of our bodies, of our lands. And so it's to overturn the colonial structure. But it begins in our own minds, each individual. The first step is to question the legitimacy of colonization. And then think of ways to resist and challenge colonial institutions and ideologies. These are some of my graduate students down at New Mexico State. I taught Native American Studies, managed the Native American program, and developed a graduate course in Native Studies. And two of the key courses was Indigenous Ways of Knowing and Decolonizing. Actually, I changed it from decolonizing methodologies to indigenous methodologies. This is a diverse group. There's a Shoshone descendant starting from the left, and a Western Apache, myself, my friend there who's a Dene cowboy, a roper, so we were pretty good friends. A Hispanic lady, an Anglo lady, a Odom person, and a Hawaiian. So it was a pretty neat group we had in that class. I really learned a lot from them. So the question is there a difference between Native American and Western knowledge? Let's take a look at that. How are we doing? Is everybody hearing me okay back there? Okay. If you take a nap, I don't blame you. Thank you. So what is our way of knowing and doing? Now, those of you who are at a table here, folks know Leroy Little Bear. And I got a lot of things from Leroy, Gregory Kaheke. We used to meet many years ago and talk about these things. And so I'm going to talk about the importance of differences, but I use this slide especially for those of us that may be educated in the what we call the Euro-Western, we're Euro-Western knowledge system. Relationality, we're all related. Natives knew that. They already had that knowledge. Western science finally caught up to us, and they have a table of elements there that we're all made of the same thing. Animacy, we're all alive. Everything is moving. Atomic theory, atoms, protons, neutrons. So rocks are alive. Everything is moving and has spirit. Western calls it energy. So these are things that we knew as indigenous people. And I've worked with indigenous people around the world, and from Africa and Mexico and Canada and that. So let's take a look at the next slide. Differences between Native American and Western knowledge. Just to reinforce the differences. Early thinkers such as Descartes separated humankind from the natural world. They developed reasoning that evolved into what's called logic. And you know, logic, I think, therefore I am. Pascal and others then developed quantification to validate logic. Now we'll have some other slides that will help us to see how this comes together. But most indigenous people never separated themselves from the natural world. Native knowledge evolved out of experiencing the environment they lived in. Native knowledge is relational and holistic. We're all related. Humankind is on the same plane as animals, plants, and all of existence. Humans are not on the top of a hierarchical pyramid as in the Western knowledge system. This means everything exists in a cyclical, relational, recurring pattern, what's called cosmology. So let's move to the next slide, please. And thank you, who's ever helping on that. Oh, it's Natalie again, so. Let's see. Oh, the answer to two important terms. In Western knowledge, we always want to know the answer, huh? But we also know that when we go visit our elders to get an answer to our situation or problem, they usually just tell us a story, huh? And we have to discern, we have to critically think the meaning of that. And so I use this slide for Euro-Western people to let them know what it's all about. This is the end result. We're all related, everything's alive, everything's moving, and everything has spirit. So now you got it. So we can go home. There's two important terms that we use in academia is called epistemology and ontology. Epistemology is how people create knowledge. And for Native people, as you know, we created knowledge. We learned from the stars and the animals and the spirits. And there's also ontology. This is about the metaphysics of cosmology, us learning from the stars. We showed that picture of Napi when he went to the sun and brought back knowledge for the man's side of the Okan, the sun dance. And woman who married a star went up and got the female side. And by the way, we can't do any ceremony without the male and female sides. We need to remember that. But here's the important thing. Note the differences in Native and Western explanation of existence. So let's move to the next slide. So scientific method versus indigenous knowledge paradigm. So another comparison just to kind of put this together for us. Western knowledge uses scientific method to find truth. And knowledge is objective. Everything is composed of objects. Remember Descartes, outside of our mind, that they're separated. Truth is based on precise observation and measurement that's verifiable through quantification, through numbers. And if something can't be measured, it doesn't exist. So that's why they called us primitive, but we see how this comes together. Native knowledge uses eons of experience and observation. Socially constructed multiple realities shaped by multiple connections with the environment, the cosmos, the living, and the non-living. And truth is informed by a set of multiple relations people have with the world informed by indigenous knowledge. Now this is really significant because people around the world are paying attention to indigenous knowledge now. And unfortunately in US, not a lot of scientific people, our philosophers are acknowledging this. Well, let's look at this thing called ontology of difference. And this is probably one of the most important things we need to know. There's a guy named Joe Quinchilo who talked about this. He was a protege of Paulo Freire, the Brazilian who helped the indigenous people, poor people down there. Now this slide is, I was trying to teach some of the students the basics of our Sundance. Those are two Pueblo students. They were standing up just to kind of reenact it before we sat down and actually done the stick game. So let's go to the next slide. Excuse me. You know, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm just an old broken up cowboy. My mom made me go to school after getting hurt in the rodeo, so that's how we got here, but there's a long story. So let's look at this. Ontology of difference, grounded on epistemological and ontological power of difference. Remember those terms we talked about it? He calls it a multilogical orientation. Western knowledge is so bound to critical supremacy and exclusionary practices that it fails to recognize the genius of subjugated and indigenous information. That just shows us we already knew about atomic theory. He champions using other processes, such as critical ontology, to examine differences to achieve new concepts of being human. There's some really powerful messages in here about these differences, and hopefully in more slides we'll see that. It's about the differences between, well, we'll cover that. Critical ontologies grounded on epistemological and ontologic power of difference. So different interpretations of selfhood, that's the key item that I really want people to look at. The study of indigeneity and indigenous ways of being challenges the tacit Western assumptions about the nature and construction of selfhood. A notion of critical ontology emerges in these conceptual contexts to push the boundaries of Western selfhood into the 21st century, as we currently gain new respect for the genius of indigenous and epistemologies. That's important, and we're going to talk about that, is that so many of the studies and things looked at wanting to compare things that we know related to what they already know in the Western science. That's why it's important to look at differences. How are we doing on time? Okay. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So I'm going to talk, I was going to have a handout, the beliefs associated with the 4 research paradigms, and for beginning researchers and all of us, this is a good way to look at how we do research. And I have our Okan picture there that came from Glenbow Museum. But I'm just going to talk about the 2 ways that the Western, I call Euro-Western, and Native ways of doing research. So we have a table A and B here, and I'll kind of go through it quickly. It might be something, well, you might not catch all of it, but it'll be something we can look at. I'll certainly share this information with you. So let's go to the next slide. So this again is about what we call positivistic, and you learned about that, about how Western knowledge creates truth, and what we call the indigenous paradigm, which is really the way of thinking and knowing is different. So the reason for doing the research for Euro-Westerns is to discover laws that are generalizable and govern the universe. That's the way they find truth. Whereas in indigenous paradigm, or thinking and knowing, we challenge deficit thinking and pathological descriptions, reconstruct a body of knowledge, promotes and transforms social change. Again, we'll bring that together a little bit for us, but deficit thinking, words like primitive, that's really deficit kind of language and thinking, huh? So what are the philosophical underpinnings? And that's important because all people of this earth have a philosophy. The reason I call Western knowledge Eurocentric because their stories come from the Greek and Romans and their philosophy. So, underpinnings for the positivistic are informed by realism, idealism, and critical realism. Well, what does that mean for those of us that are researchers? Well, it's just that their way of finding truth is highly structured. But our knowledge is informed by indigenous knowledge systems. Our knowledge systems is the world we live in, right? And the cosmos. The above, the middle, and below spirits, huh? Ontological assumptions. One reality, informed, knowledgeable with probability. All that means is there's one truth, and remember they measure it with quantification, with numbers. Huh? So looking at the indigenous paradigm, it's socially constructed with multiple realities. We've learned from visions and dreams and animals, interacting with others, being in the sweat lodge, and learning, getting messages. Place of values. In science, value-free. Only when choosing a topic for your research. Values means what's important to you as a people. Huh? And so, but in the indigenous paradigm, it's relational accountability, respectful, reciprocity, giving back, rights of the researchers. So in Western knowledge, they always want to look at protecting the human subject. But when we do research, it's protecting everything. The animals, the plants, the cosmos. So nature of knowledge. Knowledge is objective in the Western, and for natives, it's relational. We're all related. So hopefully you're seeing how this comes together. I hope you're all still awake. So let's finish this up with the next slide, these two research paradigms. What counts as truth? Truth is based on precise observation and verifiable measurement in Western. Leroy talks about particle theory. For example, in Western science physics, they have these powerful instruments that can measure these minute kinds of particles that we can't see. But in physics, they know that there's even smaller particles, but they don't have the instruments to measure it yet. So they can't say it exists. So that becomes what? Abstract theory. So hopefully students in here are catching some of this and probably already know that. Well, we're informed again by multiple relations with the universe. The methodology, how we do research. Huh? So methods is the way we do it. In Western, it's quantitative, Again, it has to be measured with numbers, correlational, that's a mathematical kind of thing. Quasi-experimental, they have to experiment. Comparative survey. Now again, we realize there's some people that may say, well, what does that mean? Well, just don't worry about it, at least it's giving us an idea of these differences. Techniques based on philosophical sagacity for native techniques of gathering data. Ethnophilosophy, stories are a theory. Language frameworks, indigenous knowledge system, talk stories, talk circles, paradigm. So now we see how this comes together with what this conference is about. It's about doing research with our own people and using our own knowledge to do the research. So let's go to finally this last part, CPAR, Community Participatory Action Research. So I had a research class, and these are some of the doctoral and master students in there. Again, we have a Pueblo, a Anglo, a Hispanic, myself, Dr. Gracio, the Washoe, we team taught this course, and Odom, and the young lady is an Oklahoma tribe, and I'm sorry, some things just, I don't recall exactly. So let's move to the next slide. Community Participatory Action Research. What is it? Now, there's been several studies in health. Actually, I was on a reader for NARCH many years ago. And health is the one that started this participatory research. But how did they do that? Well, let's hire an Indian to work with us, a Native American, even at my own university. So while we brought a Native student in with this health study, so we're making this participatory. Well, that's why it's important to question those things. But an actual CPAR, as we call it, communities participate at all levels of the research, from identifying the problem, identifying the situation, what do we want to do? We do this as a community, in a group like this. What do we want to research? What is the problem or the scope? What are we trying to find out? In this case, it's about our health and wellness, and about trauma and those kinds of things. The methods and procedures, again, we all decide how we're going to do this research. And the interpretation of the results. We decide in this participatory process what's important in the research. But it's not like the Euro-Western. If there's something that is demeaning or is secret knowledge, things like that, we just take it out. Whereas Western ways, they would never do that. So, 7 key features. PAR is a social process, it's participatory, it's practical, it's next slide, I'm sorry. Oh, I got lost. Okay. We can go to the next slide. Oh, before that, sorry. One more down. Oh, keep going forward. One more. There you go. Okay, it's a social process, it's participatory, it's practical, collaborative, it's emancipatory, it's critical, it's reflective, and it brings about change, okay? So that's kind of a summary of that. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, one time I asked Weasel Moxon and some others were talking here on campus, John Murray, about Native philosophy, and I asked him, well, what is Native philosophy? And he only told me one word, And so what I want to talk about now is what are our cultural strengths that we use as researchers to stay grounded in who we are. I have a artist that I work with, a Mexican artist, and he's quite a guy. I got a whole story behind that, but that's how he depicted our knowledge. So it's complex. So let's go to the next slide. What are the challenges in this whole thing? If you're a researcher, or especially a student, if you are seeking a degree in the educational systems, we need to remember the Western educational systems are designed to prepare you as a capitalistic worker. They're preparing you for their society. Make money. So there's a need to demonstrate knowledge and application. Oh, they need to demonstrate knowledge and application of Euro-Western practice and theory. And here's the problem. This is the challenge. As a native student, you want to help your people. You want to learn how to do research, but while you're doing a degree in whatever discipline you're in, you need to show them that you know how to do their research. So you do need to learn Euro-Western theory and practice. And that is a challenge in some ways that we'll look at, because underlying are some value conflicts. And that was that key thing. Most indigenous communities value community over individuality. This concept of selfhood. Why don't natives do well in colleges and go to counseling? And even the Western Council. In actuality, something like psychology, and I've been on many committees with doctoral students, is that in psychology, it's all about the self. I guess we'll wait for some questions, so okay. Yeah, there's a lot of things we can talk about here. Questions, it's good to question things. So native professor, okay. Native professor, a professor who happens to be native. And that's what we run into. That there are some native professors that will say, well, I'm a professor who just who happens to be native. I'm not a native professor. Whereas some of us will say, yeah, I'm a native professor. So the difference is I think, therefore I am. I am we. I am we. We're connected to everything. Conceptual theoretical framework and positionality. Well, that's some language, it's academic, but in research now you need to write a section, what theory and what practice are you going to use in your study, but also where are you coming from as an individual. Even though it's objective, you still need to say, this is the theory methods I'm going to use. Native research publication, I already mentioned that. That's one of the biggest problems why natives don't make it in the academy is because it's really tough to get things published. Most of my stuff is denied. Okay, staying grounded, using cultural strength. We done that study I told you about where native students value community, value family, community, and culture out of about 10 findings. What are the things that help me stay in college? My family, my community, my culture. And culture is about your spirituality. Identity. That's one of the biggest topics in literature for us. You know, there's just so much written about who are Native people. My method, I'll tell you this. How are we doing on time? Okay. For me, I worked in a university with only 7 professors, 15,000 students. And there's always, I was on like these diversity committees over the years, and they're always questioning, the way we teach our theory, our practice, and it's a struggle. They want more Native students and they want more Native faculty, but they don't really want to put any money behind it. And so I had to put up with that as a Native person in a college with mostly Anglo professors and actually 60% Hispanic. But for me, when it became so frustrated and just a lot of conflict, I would go in my office and I would sit there. Over here is a picture of Georgia Molly kicking woman. On the other side is Buster Yellow Kidney and one of our other elders. But I would sit there and that would ground me. That's who I am. So on all of this big knowledge system, there's only one thing I really know. Vistu Picani. So that kept me grounded to who I am, so I didn't get lost in that whole system, which is so easy to do. Of course, we have Native centers and that. Thank you. Now, if there's enough time, we do have one question, but I would actually want you to talk about how do you stay grounded in your culture in doing this Euro-Western kind of thing. There was one question over here.
I listened to some of your presentation, and I hear a lot of the white man's ways. How come we always have to prove to the white man's ways? Why do we always have to be, drum to the beat of the white man to prove ourselves? Why can't we just do it our way? Hey, just do it our way.
That's what it's about.
My brother-in-law went to the University of Calgary, and he had a run-in with a professor. And he wrote his thesis out in Blackfoot. And they battled over that. But in the end, he did write his thesis out in his language. So 2 years later, that same professor was able to encourage her Native Studies students for them to do that as well. So that was a change, right? So I think it's time that we start doing it our way instead of have to prove to the white people all the time. So anyway, it wasn't really a question. It's just that another thing is that when we talk about decolonization, you refer to the Agugots in the sun dance. The sun dance is a Western construct.
Yeah, that's
right? So why don't we just say a certain camp?
Okan. Very good. Mike Brewshead. Yeah, he's helped us a lot. Got his doctoral degree and done it all in a language. Wow. That's really neat. Was there one more question? That's good. It's not Kitaniko. Ekanansi. Yeah, so she's telling us, I don't know if you can hear her back there, but they're studying social work and the importance of staying grounded in that whole process and using their own ways, and some again echoing the challenges of doing that. Just to share with you is that when I got my doctorate degree at Montana State years ago, Wayne Stein was on my committee, and I actually done my study on talking to our elders on how we learn. And he cautioned me, and it's kind of what this is about, is that Hey, Don, remember, this is not your book. You do your book later. You're just trying to show these folks you know how to do their stuff. And that's what it's about. So any time up, we're done? Okay. I'm Don. You're done. We've got an E on it. Thank you. Thank you.